Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. The topic for today's discussion is to continue on with our analysis of markets and the interaction of buyers and sellers. And the previous lecture dealt with the demand side. And again, I pointed out to you that economics as a science is really very simple. For example, last time we talked about 5 determinants of demand. And if you're in engineering or in architecture, you have to know like 35 determinants, right? And what the stress loads are, just all kinds of details. 5 factors, total analysis of buyers. Taste and preference, income, 2 possible directions, normal goods and inferior goods. Price of other goods, 2 possible directions, substitutes and complements. Price expectations, and that's it for the individual, and then number of buyers for the market demand. One point to clarify, and I think I included it in the video, but if you think of something that influences what someone buys, and you can't figure out what determinant it is, it falls into taste and preference, because the other ones are clear, right? I mean, it is price of substitute or whatever the case is. If it's not one of the other factors, then the economist would put it into a change in taste and preference. So a change in information, change in abilities, all of those would go into changes in taste and preference. So what I want to do today is turn our attention to the opposite side of the market, and that is look at all the things that influence the behavior of sellers, all the factors that would influence what they're willing and able to produce at different possible market prices, per unit prices. And like demand, supply is a schedule of the different quantities that the sellers are both willing and able to produce and sell at different possible per unit prices. So it's the whole thing, just like demand. It's the whole function is the supply function. In general, it's a positive relationship. In general, in the long run, for example, as you try to produce more, you have to go to resources that have a higher opportunity cost. And so the height of supply is actually cost. The height of the supply curve is actually marginal cost, both in the long run and the short run. In the short run, as you look inside of the firm, marginal cost goes up because of diminishing returns to additional units of labor. So as I said, in general, it's a positive relationship. Notice the distinction, though, between that statement and what we said about demand. We said demand is always downward sloping, right? It's so strong, it's a law of economics. It's possible in what is called a constant cost industry that supply, in fact, could be horizontal. And that is, think about it, if you have unused acres of land and the demand for corn goes up and you're able to simply duplicate what you were doing at the same cost per unit, then in fact the supply, long-run supply would be constant, or new firms could enter the industry and produce. And then it's actually possible that in the short that supply could be downward sloping. And that would be what's called a decreasing cost industry. Decreasing cost industry. And that would be the case where there are economies of scale of producing larger amounts that you're now not doing because demand's not sufficient to build the larger plant. But if demand increased and you're able to go to the next level of technology, which has a lower average cost when you're at that larger quantity, then it's possible for supply to be downward sloping. Decreasing cost industry, horizontal, constant cost industry, but in general, positive relationship between price and quantity supply. We read the curve the same way we did demand. Quantities measured horizontally due to Alfred Marshall in 1890, who switched the axis to make it harder. And the distance to the function is the quantity supplied at that particular per unit price. And as I said, the height of these additional units is the marginal cost of production. Marginal cost of production. The example I like to use is, suppose we think about the salaries paid to people joining the armed services in peacetime. I don't want to get the fact that we might die as part of the calculation. But if you think about it, there are all kinds of jobs that you can do within the services. You can be an auto mechanic. You can drive a truck, a delivery truck. You could have a supply warehouse, and then there's also a civil engineering component where you actually build things and repair buildings and all these kinds of things. So let's suppose that the salary is currently $40,000 a year, and the only people who would volunteer are those who are making less than $40,000 at the same level of difficulty of work in the private sector. So so that's why that's the total quantity being supplied. If you go beyond that, the next guy over is making $42,000, and you're only offering him $40,000. He wouldn't be willing to come to work in that way. If the salary goes up to $60,000, then all these people who were making something above 40 and less than 60, assuming again you're doing the same job that you were doing on the outside, they'd be willing to come to work. They'd be willing to supply their labor services. And obviously at 80,000, then a larger number of people with higher opportunity costs would be willing to come in. So that's a good example of how the quantity supplied is responsive to the opportunity cost of the resource. And the only people who would go in have an opportunity cost less than the price being offered here. In fact, notice the similarity to demand. Demand was the height of demand was how much you value having an additional unit. And when would you buy? When the price was less than how much you value it. Everybody see it? Here, the price has to be above your opportunity cost for you to be willing to come in to the marketplace. So if it's upward sloping at higher prices, you get a larger quantity. Now, if something other than market price changes that affects how much people are willing to produce, then it would be a shift factor. It would change the supply function. And like demand, a rightward shift would be an increase in supply, a leftward shift would be a decrease because, as I said, quantity is measured horizontally. So market supply is the sum of the supply curve of the existing firms in the marketplace, the firms that are currently in the marketplace. And what I've put up is, the market is here, and I've put up potential marginal cost curves for 3 different firms, potential willingness to produce at alternative prices for 3 different firms. You'll notice I've drawn them differently, indicating that firms may have different technologies, they maybe have better, more productive resources, and so forth. So the cost curves will not look the same across all the various firms in the industry. But if you add up those quantities at each price, then you get the total quantity supplied in the marketplace. And then demand intersects supply in the market. That's the total production rate with the total consumption rate. And market price is determined by demand and supply interacting. But visualize it. That price then comes back as a piece of information to each existing firm. They look out and they say, what's the market price? Well, it's $1 a bushel, right? And that's what I can get if I produce this product. So firm A would choose the rate of production. Firm 1 choose the rate of production up to the point where marginal cost equals price for her. Firm 2 has a different cost function, but again, they compare marginal cost with market price, choose that rate of production. Firm 3 looks like they're more efficient. They produce a larger quantity, but they produce the quantity where marginal cost just matches market price. So the interesting observation is that each firm will adjust the rate of production to where marginal cost just matches market price. And consequently, it says that the resources are being efficiently allocated or coordinated by the price. The rate of production of each firm is coordinated by the price they're able to get in the marketplace. What that means is that there's no way to rearrange production among the existing firms so as to get the same level of output at a lower cost. There's no way. I mean, it's fascinating. The market is just this system, right? And each guy just does what he wants to, not to be efficient. He does it to maximize profit, right? Chooses the rate of production that's going to maximize profit. But in doing that for the economy, we get the right resources being used to produce the quantity that currently is being pulled forth by the position of the demand curve. If I told this guy looks like this guy looks like he's the most efficient guy, and this guy looks like he's not as efficient. So suppose I told this guy cut back production by 1 unit. Well, then he'd be giving up. He'd be giving up. He'd be giving up this much cost, because that's what it's now costing him to produce the unit. But if I ask this guy to add production, he's already at PE equals marginal cost, so his cost would be higher. Everybody see it? There's no way to reorganize it, because if you have somebody cut back, their marginal cost is less than the marginal cost of somebody adding that additional unit, because they're already at symmetry, right, where they're producing, where the two are the same. So it's kind of a fascinating implication of the market system. Increased supply, like demand, would be a rightward shift of the function. Decrease would be a leftward shift of the function. And as we did with demand, we could itemize what things could change that would cause suppliers to be willing to produce more or willing to produce less. And those would be called the determinants of supply, or the shift factors, meaning changes in these factors would cause supply to increase or to decrease. The most obvious one is the price of inputs. If the height of supply what is going on? Well, you all have the printed slides, so if you can put up with it. The first factor that would influence supply is the cost of inputs. If labor becomes more expensive, then marginal cost would be higher. That's the same as a decrease in supply. If inputs become cheaper, then in fact marginal cost would be down. That's the same as an increase in supply. And that's obvious, right? The one that's not as obvious is applying opportunity cost to the use of resources and understanding that a change in the value of what I could be doing with the resources would influence what I'm willing to do here. So a change in the value of alternative outputs could in fact cause a change. My favorite example is, suppose that you all have some opportunity cost of being here today, but you've all chosen to be here today. Suppose now that there's a raffle outside of Oviatt Library to be held at 12:45, and they're going to give out raffle tickets to everybody that's there, and you'll get it for free. And then at 1:30, they're going to draw the raffle tickets, and half of the people will get $1,000. Half the people there will receive $1,000 from the raffle, and so if you go there, you have to miss class, right? Good. You have to be there when they give them out, and you have to be there when they call them. Good. Well, what would happen to your willingness to come to class? Would go down. I'd have nobody here if you all understood what the deal was. And so a rise in the value of some alternative would decrease supply, because now you've got something more valuable to do. I talked to you about running a consulting firm, and my resources were my economists and my research assistants and so forth. And if they were not actively if they're not actively generating billable hours for actual litigation work, then I would have them work on databases, update databases. But that's not very valuable at all. And so one of my economists who came in, who'd been doing consulting, said, there are all kinds of research projects that are grants that are given, or contracts that are let to do research on stuff. And the states do it, and the federal government does it, and cities do it, and the Navy, Army, and Air Force do it. They offer these consulting contracts to people to solve particular kinds of problems. well, we're really good at doing this economic analysis and so forth. So he pointed out that we could sign up for a contract. Normally it has like a 1.5 or 2 year deadline. And then whenever my research assistants are not, and litigation is the highest return, the hourly rate. I pay them $30,000 a year. I bill them out at either $90 an hour or $120, depending on how long they've been there. And so there's a big source of profitability. But what we did is we then would take a contract that's due, a 1.5 from now or 2 years from now. When my people were not doing litigation, they could then work on the contract, right? And I can do the whole thing in about 2 months. I can do the whole contract in about 2 months. But I use it whenever my people are not better employed elsewhere. And then if it gets to be, it's a month away and I have a month's work, then I put my research assistants on it to complete the contract. But again, it's an idea of generating an alternative use of the resources that would raise profitability. So that's an example of this point. Third, obviously, changes in technology would tend to increase supply because changes in technology for us is positive. And you might put a double star by that because I think I've talked about this before, but technology is changing very rapidly. And in fact, according to Ray Kurzweil, the rate of information change is increasing every year. The rate at which technology is moving is increasing every year. So it's actually an exponential function as opposed to being a linear function. And changes in technology have been the major factor which has led to the rising standard of living all over the world. As people adopt new ways of doing things, that's a key element. Price of inputs, value of alternative outputs, changes in technology. That's it for the firm. That's the 3 determinants of supply. If you want to look at market supply, again, it's the sum of the existing sellers. So more sellers would increase supply. Sellers leaving the market would, in fact, decrease supply. So now I've built both markets using ceteris paribus, one factor at a time. And I'm ready to overlay the 2 functions and look at the interaction between the buyers and the sellers and see if there are predictable results of that process. So just to review, demand is downward sloping, indicating buyers' willingness to buy, determined by taste and preference, income, 2 possible directions, price of related goods, substitutes and complements, price expectation, and number of buyers. Seller supply curve determined by price of inputs, value of alternative outputs, technology, and number of sellers. So notice what we've done. We've overlaid those 2 functions in the same space. That is not a graph, that is what? Good, it's 2 graphs, right? And I'm able to overlay them because both are price-quantity relationships. So I'm able to draw them in the same space because of that. Anything about buyers, you'd look at the demand curve. Any question about sellers, you'd look at the supply curve and show their willingness to purchase and willingness to produce. So my example I like to use is ripe Hass avocados. You are Natalia. Holly? Ali, Natasha, and Michelle. Michelle, Natasha, and Ali. Natalia. I'll get somebody else. Natalia. You 3 guys are my producers in this analysis, okay? And you grow ripe Hass avocados here. And this is a farmer's market, local farmer's market. And you all have farms that are close by. And it turns out that the terrain is such that your house, I normally draw this, but your house is on level ground, and then your avocado fields are on a hillside that moves up the hillside. So you have trees planted all along there. And at lower prices, you're only willing to gather up the ones that are easy to reach. At higher prices, you're willing to hire laborers and climb ladders and go up the hillside. So marginal cost increases for each one of you, right? Good. Okay. And then all the rest of you are buyers in the marketplace. You all live in the local area. You've been here for some time, and you're familiar with the farmers market. Let's suppose at the beginning that the sellers believe that the market price is going to be $2.50 a piece. And by the way, there's a great article in this week's Economist on the demand for avocados, and the supply has decreased because of the fires and so forth in California and in Mexico, and then storms and other things that have destroyed some of the trees. And so the supply has decreased, and prices like tripled in that way. And they're hard to grow because you have to the trees don't start producing until they're like 5 years old or something like that. So anyway, so read the Economist. So they think the price is going to be $2.50. So they're willing, and they do bring 1,100 to market because that's the quantity they'd be willing to produce if they're able to sell them for $2.50. Market opens up, and you buyers walk in, and they're kind of expensive, right? What is your name? Mel.
Yeah.
Good. Mel loves avocados, right? She loves avocados, and she comes in and they're $2.50 a piece. So she buys 2 of them, not happy about it, right? And you are Christina. She said, right? And Christina buys 1. But at the end of the day, the buyers only purchased like 300 avocados. The quantity demanded will dominate the quantity exchanged in this particular case. And so you guys only sell 300 avocados. And so if you look at the buyers, is there anybody who was willing to pay $2.50 who could not get an avocado? Was there anybody willing to pay the price that couldn't get one? The answer is no. There was plenty available. So from buyers' point of view, the market worked, right? Sure, you'd like them cheaper. You always would like them cheaper. But the market basically functioned the way you want it. Now we look at the sellers at the end of the day. How'd you guys make out? Not good. Great. You brought 1,100 to market. You only sold 300. You have what is called a surplus, which means goods that you were willing and able to sell that these cheapo buyers would not take off the marketplace. In this case, you had 800 left over. Ollie, what are you going to do tomorrow?
I'm only going to pick up the avocados right by my house. So.
Meaning you're going to lower price. Right. And, all these sellers in the marketplace who never took a class in economics know if I'm not selling what I have, I'm going to have to lower price. Or the way to sell more is to lower price in that particular way. So the surplus means unsatisfied sellers. Sellers willing to sell that were not able to sell in the marketplace. And competition between them will cause the price to come down. As you charge lower prices, notice you're not willing to produce as much as the price comes down. And as the price comes down, buyers are willing to buy larger amounts. So the size of the surplus is being reduced by this process of the price falling. And the price will fall, assuming competition between the sellers. Good. And it'll continue to fall until it reaches X marks the spot. At any price above that, you have stuff being left over in the marketplace. What is this? What month are we in? February. Good. When I teach, I forget all this other kind of stuff. Like what day of the week is? I don't know what it is. But I do know it's Thursday. Right now, Nordstrom buyers are back in Chicago and Atlanta and New York, and they're looking at the summer lines of clothing. The summer lines of bikinis and bathing suits and summer wear. And these buyers' job is to try and figure out the demand in Southern California for these different items, right? And they have a lot of data about, how much you sell in each size and what the current rates of sales are for different designs, and now you have new products that are being offered for sale. And the buyer's job is to try and figure out, number one, could we sell these? And if so, what quantity could I sell? And what would be the right price to charge? And so it's pretty tricky stuff because you're trying to predict demand in the future. once you've placed the orders, and then they manufacture it and they ship it to you, and then you bring it out in May or June, then, and Nordstrom's has computers that they can monitor every item at every store in every size instantaneously. Y'all with me? They can just put in queries and they can get exactly the rate of sales right now for all their items. As soon as they notice that an item is not selling at a rate which would clear the inventory by the end of the summer season, that's the time to put it on sale, right? That's the time to bring the price down because of that. They can, one of their alternatives is to sell off any excess inventory to secondary stores like Marshall's or I think Ross. Yeah, and so the price they're able to get there is the bottom of what they'd be willing to lower their price to, plus their cost of production and so forth. Good. Suppose instead that the market opened up, and this is what Ollie was going to, suppose you only thought the price was going to be 25 cents. You just estimated that these people, they're not going to buy anything. So at 25 cents, as Ollie said, you just pick up the ones that are on the ground. You hire a teenager to do it. And the quantity brought to market is 200 units in that way. Good. So the market opens up, and you guys walk in, and the chalkboards show ripe Hass avocados, 25 cents a piece. How do you like it? Great. You bought 2 when they were $2.50, so she buys 8 of them, right? I mean, you get there in the morning, right? And you bought 1, you buy 6 of them, right? Well, by 9:30, what's the case? You're sold out, right? Because at 25 cents, the quantity demanded by all of you buyers would be like 850 units. Good. So you guys are satisfied, right? The market worked really well. In fact, if you sold out now, you recognize you could raise price. And if you can raise price, you're willing to produce larger quantity. Good, good. How'd you buyers make out? These guys made out great, right? But the rest of you came in and it said ripe Hass avocados, 25 cents, and there are no avocados, right? No avocados. It's called a shortage, as you know. It means disappointed buyers, buyers willing and able to pay the price, not able to get the goods. If you go to a store, like you go to Ralph's, and Ralph has put flank steak on sale for like $1 a pound or something. And so all these people are excited. They go in and there's no flank steak. What do? Huh? To the manager, right? They let the sellers know right away. You guys, you probably never even had any flank steak. You just did that to get me in here, and I want a rain check, right? I want this and I want that. So when you have a shortage, they're upset buyers, and they will let sellers know of their concerns in that particular way. Recognizing that information, again, we have the willingness, the ability of sellers now to raise price, which is what they always wanted to do, right? They always wanted to. Shortage says I'm able to do that because somebody out there is willing to pay more than 25 cents. In fact, you buyers may have even said to them, I would have paid $1.50 for flank steak, right? But clearly, unsatisfied buyers means that they're able to raise price. As they raise price, they're willing to produce larger amounts. And as the price goes up, the buyer's quantity demanded is declining. So the size of the shortage is being eliminated by competition between the buyers. Competition between the buyers. That's not right. Now, going back to this example, what is your name? Andre, you're a consultant here in the Valley, and you have these 2 people from the East Coast who are going to grant you a contract which would generate $10,000 of economic profit, right? Economic profit above and beyond everything else. And they're coming out tonight to have dinner with you and discuss the contract. And the guy's wife loves California salads, right? Loves California salads, which a major ingredient of is Avocados, good. So it's 4 o'clock, you're really excited about it. You walk into the market and there's no avocados, right? Good. How much would you be willing to pay for an avocado? Oh, let me be clear. If you can't produce the salad, you will not get the contract, right? If you do, you'll make $10,000 profit. Would you pay $4,000 to get 2 avocados?
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you pay 8,000? Anything up to 10,000, because that's how much they're worth to you, right? So you look at the distribution of what was actually produced. I'm sorry, your name again? Mel, right. Mel bought 8 of them. And when she got home, one of them fell out of the bag on the cement. And, you know, they're ripos avocados, so that side got all pushed in and stuff. And she only paid 25 cents for it, so she basically throws it in the trash, right? You have 7 left. And Christina had 6, and they were only a quarter, so you fed one to your dog, right? It turns out the oil is really good for the animal's skin, right, and so forth. Good. So when there's a shortage, notice that the amount produced and sold is not allocated to the highest valued users. It's allocated to who got there first, right? So here's a guy willing to pay up to $10,000. Where are his avocados? One's in the trash and one's in the dog dish, right? So when you have a shortage, goods are misallocated. They don't go to the highest valued user. As we've seen, any price above unsatisfied sellers' surplus tends to cause the price to come down. Any price below, there's a shortage, unsatisfied buyers competing will tend to drive the price up. Until you reach that one unique price at which the rate of production is just matching the rate of consumption, meaning the quantity demanded, distance to demand, just matches the rate of production, quantity supplied at 600 per unit. If that's the case, then we call that equilibrium. We call it equilibrium. When you hear the term, aside from economics, if you hear the term equilibrium, what does that mean to you? Good. Balance is the first thing, right? And that's what it means here. The rate of production matches the rate of consumption. Remember, these are quantities per time period, right, in both cases. Equilibrium also would mean what else? If something's reached equilibrium,
function properly. The market is functioning properly.
well, right. But just the word equilibrium. If something's reached equilibrium, aside from matching the two sides, what else does that mean?
Heavier.
The maximum willing to pay.
No, not on the margin, yes, for the last unit. Right, yeah.
It's most efficient.
Good, it's most efficient, excellent. But what it means is there's no tendency for change. Y'all with me? If something's reached equilibrium, it's balanced, right? And so there's no, if those functions are the same, there's nothing that would cause price to go up or down. The price would just stay at the equilibrium level unless there's a change in one of the functions or both of the functions in that particular way. Good. So X marks the spot is the equilibrium price and quantity. Also notice, as I pointed out, these are rates of activity. These are rates of activity. So visualize that the sellers every day put 600 avocados into the bin, and every day the buyers come in and take 600 out of the bin, right? Now, the role of inventories is to act as a buffer stock between the rate of production and the rate of consumption. You can go into Ralph's anytime, day or night. I think they're open 24 hours. And at 3 a.m., there's avocados sitting there waiting for you to buy them. So the reason stores do that is, number one, to make the good available to you so that you can examine it and smell it and thump the watermelon and so forth, and that it's available whenever you want it, right? You can buy it whenever you want it. It's costly to do because some of them go bad, some of them get dropped on the floor, whatever the case may be. But they're willing to do it for that reason. But as I said, the other thing is the inventory acts as a buffer stock. So suppose your inventory is 100 at the beginning. So there's already 100 in the bin. And you put 600 in, and they take 600 out. What's the inventory at the end of the day? 100. It's the same it was at the beginning. If the inventory stays the same, then it means we're in equilibrium, right? The rate of production is being matched by the rate of consumption. If the inventory is building up, what does that tell you? They're not buying as much as we're producing. And so that's the key element to cutting back production or lowering price, or doing both of those two things. If instead the inventory is being drawn down, that says they're buying more rapidly than we're producing. So we have the ability then to raise price and increase the rate of production. Now, obviously, they don't do it on a daily basis. I mean, the demand shifts all the time based on day of the week and weather and all kinds of factors. But if I see consistently, right, that the inventory is being drawn down, and I'm replacing it, then I know I can make that adjustment. Good. Equilibrium, quantity demanded matches quantity supplied, no upward or downward pressure on price, and as you pointed out, the goods are allocated to the highest valued users. Now, what you can't see is the header, which just says what are the effects of an increase in demand on price and quantity. Well, it's obvious. Demand is currently pulling forth this rate of production. And interacting with the sellers, it's bringing the price to $6 a piece. An increased demand would be a rightward shift. We can see then that price would tend to go up, and the quantity being exchanged would tend to increase as a result of doing that. What is the effect of what is the effect of a decrease in demand on the rate of production and price? Well, you guys are used to visualizing this. A decrease would be a leftward shift. It means that from the original equilibrium, price would tend to come down, and the rate of exchange would tend to decline. And then you can look at changes in supply. An increased supply would be a rightward shift. Price would come down, quantity would increase. Decrease in supply would be a leftward shift, and price would tend to go up and quantity would tend to be reduced. So understanding those effects on price and quantity of shifts in these two functions, it allows you to solve a whole bunch of problems in this way. Suppose you know the price of a good has gone up. That's all you know. You just know the price of a good is higher than it was. What are two possible reasons for that? What are two things that would have generated that?
Increasing demand.
Or?
The increase in input, the price of input.
No, but you're going second level, which is great. The first level is decrease in supply, right? And then why did that happen? That's when you look at that next list, right? Why did supply decrease? Good. So you know right away one of two things or both have happened. Either demand's increased or supply's decreased, or both have in fact happened. If you know both the quantity change and the price change, then you can isolate which of the curves have in fact changed. Price has gone up and they're selling more. What's happened? Demand has increased. Good. Visualize it. Demand's higher, higher price, more being produced. If the price is up and the amount being exchanged is smaller, supply's decreased, right? And then, as you pointed out, if I know it's a decrease in supply, then I can go to the next level and try and say, well, why is that the case? Was it increased input prices, increase in the value of alternative outputs, technology, or whatever the case may be? So you can do that both forward-looking and backward-looking at markets, and you want to be able to solve those mentally, right, of what has probably happened. And then, as I pointed out, inventories act as a buffer stock between the two. Drawing down inventories means demand is increased and I can raise price. Inventories building up means demand is not what I thought, and I would tend to lower price. So we know that equilibrium price is the interaction of the demand and supply. But what I want you to get in your mind is the dynamics over time of markets. And the dynamic is that demand pulls forth production. Demand is what pulls forth the rate of production. And demand determines price. Demand determines price. What people are willing to pay is what determines the price in the marketplace. If demand increases, we can see the rate of production is increased. The amount of price increase depends upon how my inputs prices change or other factors. Depends upon the technology of production and all those kinds of things. So demand pulls forth production, and demand determines price. When I was a starving graduate student, I lived in married student housing down on Sawtell Boulevard down in West LA. Now they have beautiful condos. And I was going through a divorce, and so and the kids were with me, and Thanksgiving was coming, and my son was 7 and my daughter was 5, and you just feel horrible. I mean, it had to be. Trust me. I tried everything, and it was like, no, this has to end. So, and it was not pretty. It was not pretty. But I had the kids, and Thanksgiving's coming, and I really wanted to do, you really want to do as much as you can for the kids because it's really rough on them. And I'd done a lot of gourmet cooking, for, entertaining and stuff, but I never cooked a turkey. And I know Mother used to get up at like 4 a.m. to start cooking it, and she'd have to shove stuff up inside the bird, which was disgusting and stuff. And so I got an idea, and so I talked to the kids, and I said, what is Thanksgiving? And Rick said, it was the celebration of the harvest. And I said, right. And it's been celebrated since colonial days, right? But I said, up in New York, and this actually, if you look it up, is true, guys would go out and hunt for wild birds and for wild turkeys and stuff like that. But there weren't very many of them around. And so I said, this year, we're going to have a traditional colonial Thanksgiving dinner. And that is live Maine lobsters, right? Because I know how to cook those, right? You boil salt water. When the steam rises, you wait 15 minutes and they're done. And I know how to melt butter and put lemon juice in it and those kinds of things. So I went to a little seafood place on Little Santa Monica Boulevard, actually. And the lobsters were, I don't know, $10 a pound or something like that. So I bought 2 live Maine lobsters. And I paid $10 a pound and so forth. And so the question is, why did you have to pay that? Well, some people would give the following explanation. They'd say, well, the lobsters are over in Maine, and so they have to go out in the ocean and find them and catch them, and then they have to put them in salt water and keep them alive. Then they have to ship them all the way across the United States and then have a tank with salt water and aeration and stuff. So it cost them a lot to do, and that's why. And the answer is, wrong. The reason I had to pay $10 was because there are all these people in West LA who were willing to pay $10. Y'all with me? The cost determines the rate of production. The cost, if I know I can sell them for 10, I'll bring more in as long as the cost is less than 10. Y'all with me? The quantity supplied is what responds to the price, right? Not the price responding to the cost of production. The quantity supplied is determined by the cost of production, which is what determines how much they get in. And I like to tell the story for another reason. On that day, I outbid the wealthiest people in West LA because I got the lobsters. And I'm poor, right? And I was. But on that day, they were so valuable to me because of my children that I was the one who ended up getting them. Now, it might be that all those other people have lobster every night, right? But on that day, I got the lobsters because I valued them more than the market price. The kicker to the story is my son and daughter were 2 years apart, and so my daughter had the same teachers as my son as she went up through elementary school. And when one year it was getting close to Thanksgiving, and she asked the class, "What are you all doing for Thanksgiving?" And my daughter said, "We're having live Maine lobster." And the teacher looked at her and said, "Yeah, you're with your father this year, right?" Yeah, okay, good. So anyway, that's my story. Good.